If you're into the idea of a heartwarming, sexually driven comedy about a bunch of virginal teenage girls trying to come to terms with sexuality for the first time as they enter adulthood, you might get something out of Mari Okada's manga, O Maidens in Your Savage Season. I have to look at the title every time to remember it. So if you're not familiar with her, Mari Okada is one of the most famous anime writers in the business. She is probably best known for doing Anohana. She wrote the anime adaptation of Toradora. She recently made her directorial debut by directing the film Makia. I have a whole video about her called The Queen of Anime Melodrama from years back. That's sort of an introduction. She became sort of even more popular a couple years ago when she wrote an autobiography and revealed how insane her upbringing was and how this clearly has affected the way that she writes characters, because all of her shows are known for their extreme melodrama, for characters who are almost so overly dramatic that it's hard to relate to or even believe in, but it's just a result of the fact that Mari Okada's life was like that, which kind of lends this odd fascination to her stories when you know this, that instead of seeing it as unrelatable, you see it more as alien, like an alien species created these stories on some level. Well, she also made a manga a couple years ago, O Maidens in Your Savage Season, which is drawn by Nao Emoto, whose artwork is fantastic. The character designs are really great, extremely expressive. There's tons of big full-page spreads all throughout this manga that just look great. I absolutely love the artwork all throughout this thing. And it's got an anime coming up just next season. There's going to be an anime adaptation, so if you don't care about manga and you just want to see the anime, Le Deuce is doing it, the studio that recently formed and did Release the Spice, which I don't think many people watched, and I don't know if anybody will watch this one aside from Mari Okada fans, but the tone of this thing definitely reminds me most of Dragon Pilot, amongst all the things that she's written. The comedy stylings, the idea that it has sort of an ensemble cast of young women. This is much more grounded than Dragon Pilot since it's just a high school story. There's nothing unrealistic or magical about it, but the fixation on more comedy really made me enjoy this. I think Mari Okada is a great comedy writer. She writes just hilarious wordplay and jokes. Her characters have really fun personalities, and again, this one comes off more believable and relatable than Dragon Pilot did with its characterization, so I was able to get a little bit more easily invested in these characters and to sort of see where they're coming from, even if a couple of them are pretty weird. Essentially, you could consider this a shoujo romantic comedy, but the fact that it is so fixated on sex as the centerpiece of the story, very sort of outrageously, makes it feel pretty different from most shoujo rom-coms. And also there's the fact that it has really an ensemble cast. There is a sort of main character, the girl on the cover, but all 5 of the girls in her literature club are all pretty important and have their own stories going on all simultaneously that kind of intersect in the fact that they're all a part of this group. So our main 5 girls are in a lit club, and right away we deal with the concept that was most interesting to me, that these girls are reading classical literature that tends to involve a lot of sex. There's a lot of really in-depth descriptions and depictions of sex in the books that they're reading, even though they themselves are meant to not be having sex. They're high school students. They're all 5 members of the club are virgins, even though they're living in a world where there's plenty of girls who are, just talking about sex and all the fucking they're doing all the time surrounding them. And they're kind of having to come to terms with this fact that, that sex is a part of life, a part of the world. They're learning about it. They kind of understand it because they're reading about it in books and getting a sense of it. But basically aren't supposed to be having it. It's just one of those things that about our world that is so absurd and is such a great way to pull drama out of, to just explore how hilarious and how strange it is that we live in a world like this, where you, as a teenager, are simultaneously encouraged to read and to expand your breadth of knowledge about the world, but also to not sort of stray too far from social expectations, even though you're learning much deeper things about sex than most people would know if you are reading literature at that age. Our main girl has a childhood friend who is a sort of a pretty boy who is being chased by other girls, but he's kind of a dunce. He seems to be just kind of blowing them off. And she's realizing she has feelings for him. That storyline is probably the most cliched and obvious of the ones in here. The other girls have much more interesting stories. You've got the leader of the literature club, who is the sort of deeply anti-sex, very strict. She doesn't even want the word to be mentioned in their club anymore. She starts trying to make up alternative words for sex that they can use. Even though a lot of this is born out of her sexual frustration, and as a guy in her class starts showing some affections towards her, starts to challenge her worldview. You've got the blonde girl who just wants to have sex because it's something that she wants to experience before she dies, because her viewpoint on life is that because the history of mankind is but a blip in the history of the earth, she basically is already dead. She's like, in the grand scheme of things, I am practically not even alive, so I need to make sure that I get these things that I want to do done before I die, such as fuck. She's probably the most alien character, but she's also probably my favorite. Then you've got this short little girl who's very dark, and she's an author who's already trying to get published. She's trying to write erotica because her editor, who I don't know what the fuck is wrong with him, thinks it would be really good to have a high school student writing erotica as a gimmick. Seems questionably legal to me, but nonetheless, he's encouraging her to do this, so she goes on to sex chat rooms and is like trying to sext with people to learn about how to write about it for her book. And then there's a fifth girl who really hasn't done anything yet in this first volume. She's just kind of one of the more normal characters. I assume we'll learn more about her later, or she'll get some kind of story. So that's our main cast, and the way this volume plays out is mostly just to sort of introduce them, their school, their social situations, as their feelings start to unfold. There are some pretty surprising moments. There are some good twists that I don't want to spoil. If you flip through this book in the store, you will most likely come across a certain page that will turn your head, and certainly was part of what made me want to read this. But yeah, there's some pretty crazy stuff, and like it's very forward about the subject of sex, because I mean it is happening. Some of my favorite parts are when these girls are all so in their heads about sex, and meanwhile there's other girls in their class just talking about like the crazy sexual things they have done, because of course, like, you are surrounded by this when you're at this age, which is what the Savage season, in reference in the title, of course, is the period of life when sex is suddenly surrounding you and you're trying to remain a maiden or explore your feelings about it. So yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. It's pretty cute. It's pretty hilarious. It's definitely a page turner. I burned through this thing in one 30-minute sitting, pretty much. I just sat down and plowed through it. Most of the chapters kind of end on cliffhangers, so it's the kind of thing where you find yourself wanting to just blaze through it. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people, after an episode or two of the anime, did just go and read the whole manga up to wherever it is. I don't know if this is complete, because only Volume 1 has come out in America. Volume 2 is supposed to come out in, like, August. So, I don't know the status of it in Japan, but, you know, if it is complete, yeah, I could see a lot of people just going and reading the whole thing, because, again, it ends on such cliffhanger moments that you're not going to want to wait around. And the artwork is so beautiful. It's really hard for me to imagine that the anime will be better than the manga. I mean, there are moments in this that I think would work extremely well in animation, where there's sort of fast moments where you're like just turning page after page as something really quickly happens. There's like a feverish sequence that I would even consider to be like animation within the context of the book itself. But at the same time, again, I don't know if it would be as good in animation unless the team really knocked it out of the park, because the artwork is so good in this manga. So we'll see what happens. Maybe voice acting, music, and all that will add to this story, but You know, it's worth reading the manga because it is really gorgeous. And yeah, that's it for that one. If you want to buy this, you should use my Amazon Associates link down in the description. I get a kickback. It doesn't cost you anything. You just click the link, and whatever you buy after doing so, I get a percentage, I guess. On the next episode of Manga Mondays, I'll be reviewing a cult favorite, The Voynich Hotel, because I bought this like a year ago and I still haven't read it yet. So yeah, check that out if you're interested in being ahead of the curve, and I'll see you in the next one.